Far from the comfort of city streets and lamplight, there is a place where the sea itself decides the fate of men. On the northern coast, battered by winds and endless storms, a solitary lighthouse stands tall against the fury of nature. It should be a sanctuary, a guardian of sailors and a promise of safety. Yet within its walls, a darker story unfolds. Tonight, you will hear the tale of a vanished man, a fatal fall, and a truth so carefully hidden it could destroy lives. This is the Lighthouse Keepers Secret. The night was a merciless one. Rain lashed against the cobblestones of the small fishing village, and waves smashed themselves into the jagged cliffs with a roar that seemed almost alive. The wind cut across the shore like a blade, rattling the shutters of cottages and howling through the alleys as though carrying some ancient warning. Even the fishermen, men accustomed to danger, sat huddled in the tavern, their eyes darting anxiously toward the cliffs where the great lighthouse stood defiant against the storm. Inspector James Harland stepped down from the carriage, boots sinking into the mud of the village square. He pulled his heavy overcoat tighter across his chest and adjusted the brim of his fedora, the rain immediately soaking the felt. He was not a man easily rattled, yet even he felt a sense of unease as he turned his gaze toward the cliffs. The light, the one beacon that should have cut clean and steady through the darkness, flickered, just for an instant. But for a lighthouse, even a heartbeat of hesitation was too long. Harland had been summoned under official orders. Samuel Archer, the assistant keeper of the lighthouse, had vanished some weeks earlier. The village constable filed a perfunctory report, but whispers persisted. Some claimed Archer had been swallowed by the sea during one of his late-night rounds. Others suggested he had debts in the city and had fled under cover of night. But the villagers, superstitious and bound to the rhythm of the tides, believed something else entirely. They spoke of the lighthouse as if it were alive, a jealous guardian that demanded sacrifice. Archer, they said, was merely the latest to be claimed. Harland dismissed superstition, but not fear. Fear was a powerful solvent. It revealed truths hidden beneath layers of civility. He trudged across the slick cobblestones, his polished shoes ruined within minutes, until the road became a winding path up the cliffside. The climb was brutal, the wind tugging at his coat like the hands of unseen ghosts, the spray of salt water hitting his face even at such a height. The further he climbed, the more he felt the isolation. The village below grew smaller, the rest of the world farther away. At last, he reached the gate. The lighthouse loomed above him, a cylinder of weathered stone rising into the blackness, crowned with a glass lantern that pulsed faintly through the rain. The iron door groaned as it opened, revealing warmth and shadows within. There he met the inhabitants, who, for the moment, were his only company. Mr. Alcott, the aging keeper, shoulders stooped, face lined like driftwood. His eyes held both wisdom and a flicker of guilt, as though haunted by storms past. Margaret Alcott, his wife, stern and sharp-eyed, her voice clipped with authority. She greeted Harland not as a guest, but as an intruder. Thomas Greaves, the young assistant, barely into his 20s, with a restless energy and ambition that clashed with the slow rhythm of lighthouse life. He watched Harland with curiosity, almost excitement. Clara Wynne, a schoolteacher from the village, stranded here by the storm. Her presence was the most unexpected, and her pale face betrayed nerves she tried to hide. The air inside was thick with the smell of salt, oil, and damp wool. Shadows flickered across the walls from the lanterns, as though the storm itself had followed Harland indoors. Introductions were brief, uneasy. Conversation drifted inevitably to Archer, the missing man. Mr. Alcott muttered that the sea was merciless, that Archer was careless. Margaret said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Thomas scoffed, insisting Archer was too experienced to simply vanish. Clara kept her eyes on the floor, her hands trembling as though she knew more than she dared say. Harland noted it all. He did not press them. Not yet. The storm was too fierce, the tension too raw. He would wait until the morning to begin his formal inquiries. For now, he would watch, listen, and learn. But as he settled into the small guest room, the sound of the storm hammering against the windows, a thought gnawed at him. The light in the tower had flickered again, and he could not shake the feeling that Archer's disappearance was only the beginning. Before dawn, the sea would not be the only force to claim a life within these walls. The storm showed no mercy through the night. By morning, the waves still battered the cliffs, though the rain had thinned into a steady drizzle. The lighthouse stood firm, its stone walls slick with seawater, its lantern above sweeping a pale beam across the endless gray horizon. The world outside was unreachable, cut off by the storm's lingering wrath. Inside, 5 people remained bound together, not by choice, but by circumstance. Inspector Harland rose early, his sleep restless, his mind troubled by the missing assistant. He joined the others in the common room, a space of stone walls, modest wooden furniture, and a roaring iron stove that fought the dampness. A long wooden table bore the remains of breakfast: black tea, salted fish, and coarse bread. Around it sat the keepers of the light. Their words were polite enough, but their eyes told a different story. Mr. Alcott, the master of the tower, sat at the head of the table. His body was failing, yet his presence still commanded respect. His gnarled hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup. He spoke sparingly, each word weighed down by decades of service. Harland noticed how often the old man's gaze wandered to the sea, as if afraid of what secrets it might reveal. Beside him sat Margaret, his wife. Her posture was rigid, her hair pinned into a severe bun, her expression set in lines of steel. She had the air of someone who tolerated no nonsense, who had survived storms of more than one kind. When Harland asked casually about Archer, she dismissed the subject in a clipped tone. "The sea takes what it wants, Inspector. Best you accept that." Her certainty and her refusal to mourn struck Harland as too deliberate. Thomas Greaves leaned forward in his chair, unable to contain his restless energy. His eyes glimmered with ambition, with the hunger of a man who believed the lighthouse could be his stepping stone to greater things. "Archer didn't vanish because of the sea," he said boldly. "He was too clever, too steady. Something happened here inside these walls, and I intend to prove it." His words earned a scowl from Margaret, but Harland noted the spark of truth or arrogance in his tone. Clara Wynne, the young schoolteacher, was the odd piece on the board. Stranded here by the storm, she seemed fragile against the rough-hewn walls of the lighthouse. She clutched her shawl as though it were a shield, her eyes darting whenever Archer's name arose. When Harland pressed gently, she offered a faint smile, saying she had met Archer only in passing, but her trembling hands told another story. Clara was hiding something, that much was certain. The inspector spent the day observing. He followed Alcott up the spiral staircase to the lantern room, noting how the old man struggled with every step, his joints stiff with age. It seemed unlikely he could have overpowered a younger man, let alone concealed his disappearance. Yet guilt clung to him like the smell of oil and salt. Margaret busied herself with household chores, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. When Harland asked about her late brother, lost at sea years earlier, she grew tense, her composure slipping for a moment. "The sea owes us all debts," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Thomas showed Harland the logbooks, pages filled with careful handwriting, recording every storm, every ship, every flicker of the light. Yet Harland noticed gaps, nights unrecorded, ink smudged, pages torn out. When asked, Thomas shrugged. Mistakes happen. But the smile he wore did not reach his eyes, and Clara, she lingered at the window, staring at the sea with a look that was not fear, but longing. When Harland approached, she startled. He asked if she knew Samuel Archer well. She hesitated too long before shaking her head. Later, in her room, Harland discovered a small handkerchief tucked beneath her pillow, embroidered with the initials S.A. The school teacher's lie was clear. By evening, the lighthouse felt more prison than refuge. The storm outside raged on, cutting them from the world. Inside, suspicion grew with every glance, every word half spoken. Harland paced the narrow halls, his mind sorting the pieces of a puzzle still forming. The missing man haunted every corner. Archer's boots still sat by the door. His bunk lay neatly made, as though waiting for his return. And yet the others behaved as if he had never existed. When the lantern above flickered again that night, plunging the room into momentary darkness, Harland felt his heartbeat quicken. The storm was not the greatest danger here. No, the danger came from within these walls. And though he could not yet name it, he knew. The lighthouse was keeping secrets, and one of its keepers was lying. The storm reached its cruelest height by midnight. The sea roared like a beast at the cliff's edge, the lighthouse swaying ever so slightly as the wind howled around its stone tower. Rain struck the windows in sheets, and the lantern above flickered with a strange hesitation, as though the storm had infected its very flame. Inspector Harland had been pacing the common room, every nerve sharpened by unease. The others lingered in uneasy silence. Margaret sat by the stove, mending a torn sleeve, her lips pressed into a thin line. Alcott smoked his pipe in silence, the glow illuminating his weary features. Clara sat apart near the window, staring out into the chaos beyond. Thomas, restless as always, paced the length of the room. The light dimmed again, Thomas snapped suddenly. His voice cracked through the silence. If this storm blinds a ship, if men die out there, their blood will be on our hands. Alcott muttered that the flame would hold, but Harland could see doubt in his eyes. Thomas was already climbing the stairs, determined to inspect the lantern room himself. "No use arguing," Margaret said coldly. "He'll do as he pleases." Minutes passed. The inspector strained his ears, listening to the echo of Thomas's boots on the spiral staircase. The sound faded into the upper reaches of the tower. Then, silence. Harland frowned. A chill passed through him, one not caused by the storm. He rose from his chair. "I'll fetch him," he said. But before he could, a sound split the night. It was a scream, short, sharp, and then the sickening crash of a body striking stone. Clara gasped. Margaret dropped her needlework. Harland ran for the door, his coat flaring behind him. He pushed into the storm, the rain slashing his face. At the base of the tower, half buried in the mud, lay Thomas Greaves. His limbs sprawled at unnatural angles, his face pale, his eyes glassy, staring into nothing. For a moment, the only sound was the storm. Then Margaret whispered. "An accident." He slipped. But Harland knelt beside the body, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. The staircase within the tower was steep, treacherous, but not enough to cause this. He found the telltale sign at once. a smear of oil on the sole of Thomas's boot, and the glisten of fresh grease on one of the iron steps above. Not an accident. Sabotage. The others gathered at the doorway, pale and trembling. Alcott leaned heavily on his cane, shaking his head. The boy was careless, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Clara sobbed into her hands, whispering Thomas's name. Margaret's expression hardened. "This proves nothing, Inspector," she said. "Storms cause accidents. You cannot accuse us all of murder." But Harland's instincts screamed otherwise. He returned to the staircase, running his hand along the cold iron railing. The smear of oil was deliberate, the step slick in just one place, not enough to be natural. Someone had laid a trap. Someone had intended for Thomas Greaves to fall. He gathered them all in the lantern chamber, the storm raging outside, the flickering flame casting long shadows across the room. The inspector's voice was calm but hard. This was no accident. The boy was silenced. Eyes darted from face to face. Alcott's guilt seemed heavier than ever, his silence almost damning. Margaret's defiance was sharp, her lips curling in scorn. Clara trembled, her tears genuine. Yet Harland remembered the embroidered handkerchief hidden in her room, the initials of Archer stitched in her delicate hand. What secrets was she hiding? "Why Thomas?" Clara whispered through her sobs. "Why him?" Harland had no answer, but he knew this. Thomas had been bold, reckless, willing to accuse others. He had spoken too freely of Archer's disappearance, too eager to declare that the truth lay within these walls. He had promised Harland he would uncover it, and now he was dead. The inspector turned back to the body, his jaw tightening. In Thomas's hand, still clenched even in death, was a scrap of paper torn from the logbook. On it, hastily scrawled words. He knew. Harland's stomach knotted. Who had Thomas been accusing? What secret had he discovered in those torn pages? The storm thundered above, the lantern shuddered in its glass cage, and the walls of the lighthouse seemed to close in. The first death had come, and Harland knew it would not be the last. The lighthouse had fallen into a heavy silence after Thomas Greaves's body was laid to rest in the cold storage room below. Silence could conceal truths. Silence could protect murderers. He kept them together in the common room. The flickering lantern light painted their faces in sharp relief, each expression revealing cracks beneath their composure. Clara Wynn's hands trembled as she held a cup of untouched tea. Margaret Alcott sat stiff-backed, her eyes sharp as knives. Mr. Alcott puffed nervously at his pipe, the smoke curling around his gaunt face. Thomas was silenced, Harland said, his voice cutting through the quiet. That much is certain. The oil on the stairs was no accident. Someone in this room put it there. Clara gasped. "You can't mean you think one of us?" "I don't think," Harland corrected coldly. "I know." He turned his gaze to Mr. Alcott first. The old keeper shrank under the inspector's stare, his shoulders sagging. "You've been master of this lighthouse for decades. You know every bolt, every stair, every weakness. Who else but you could tamper with the very steps beneath our feet?" Alcott's hands trembled, the pipe nearly slipping from his grasp. "I am an old man, Inspector. My knees scarcely carry me up those stairs. If I had oil to pour, it would be to keep the machinery running, not to kill a boy." His eyes grew distant. "I've seen enough men die at sea. Why would I bring death here into my own house?" But Harland remembered the whispers in the village. that years ago Alcott had been blamed for a shipwreck, accused of extinguishing the lantern during a storm and sending sailors to their graves. Could guilt have driven him now to repeat the crime? Or was that very guilt what made him seem so haunted? Before Harland could press further, Margaret spoke, her voice sharp and commanding. "Enough. My husband has served faithfully, longer than you've been alive, Inspector. He would never sabotage his own light. If you must look for blame, look to the others." Her eyes cut toward Clara, who flinched under the weight of the accusation. "What were you doing here, girl, when the storm trapped you? What business has a schoolteacher in a lighthouse?" Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. Harland leaned closer, his tone soft but insistent. "Tell us, Miss Wynne. You knew Archer, didn't you? The missing assistant." Her composure shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew him, more than knew him. We were promised to each other. He swore he would leave this place, leave the endless storms and oil and smoke. He was saving money for us, for a life beyond the sea." Margaret sneered. "Then why did he vanish, girl? Why did he leave you waiting?" Clara shook her head, trembling. "He didn't run. He wouldn't. Something happened to him here. And Thomas knew. He told me he found proof in the logbooks, something Archer had written before he disappeared. That's why—" Her voice broke. "That's why Thomas had to die." The room fell into stunned silence. Harland studied her closely. Her grief seemed real, her pain unfeigned. But grief did not erase suspicion. If Thomas had discovered proof, why had Clara not seen it? Why had she hidden her connection to Archer until now? He turned to Margaret. "You defend your husband fiercely, Mrs. Alcott, but you deflect suspicion too quickly. Why?" Her eyes narrowed. "Because I know what storms can do to a man's mind, Inspector. I've watched my husband break his back to keep that light burning, while the sea tore ships apart below. I've buried a brother claimed by the waves. You think I would add murder to the list of cruelties I've endured?" Harland's jaw tightened. She was clever, too clever. Her words were sharp, but her eyes flickered when she spoke of her brother. Was there a deeper bitterness there? Some old wound festering still? The night dragged on. Harland searched Archer's old bunk, finding a set of letters hidden beneath the mattress. They were addressed to Clara, filled with longing and promises of escape. The last letter ended abruptly, as if Archer had been interrupted mid-sentence. It was dated the night he vanished. Returning to the common room, Harland found the group tense, each staring at the others with suspicion. He laid the letters on the table. Archer did not run. He was silenced, just as Thomas was, and the killer is among us. The storm raged outside, but inside the true storm was only beginning. Clara wept quietly, clutching the letters to her chest. Alcott sat in brooding silence, guilt and despair etched into his features. Margaret's face remained a mask, but a crack of unease flickered in her eyes. Harland felt it then, the claustrophobia of truth closing in, the walls of the lighthouse pressing tighter. The killer was here, watching, waiting, and before the storm passed, more secrets would be dragged into the light. The storm showed no sign of easing. By dawn, the sea had turned from violent black to a bruised gray, yet the waves still pounded the cliff, as though intent on dragging the lighthouse into the abyss. Inside, the air was staler, heavier, thick with suspicion and the acrid scent of burnt lamp oil. Inspector Harland had not slept. He moved like a man possessed, pacing the stone floors of the tower, retracing steps, cataloging every word spoken during the long, harrowing night. 2 men gone, Samuel Archer missing, Thomas Greaves dead, and still no confession. The truth clung stubbornly to the shadows. He climbed the spiral staircase once more, the groan of the iron steps echoing with each footfall. At the top, the great beacon burned faintly, its glow uneven. Harland examined the machinery again, and there it was, a panel forced open, a screw half turned, as though someone had deliberately tampered with it. Not sabotage to the ships at sea, but sabotage meant to make the tower itself dangerous. Whoever had done this had knowledge, patience, and a willingness to risk lives. Descending, Harland returned to the common room, where the 3 remaining occupants sat in strained silence. Clara clutched Archer's letters tightly, as though they were the last pieces of him she would ever possess. Margaret sat with arms folded, her face an impenetrable mask. Mr. Alcott puffed his pipe in anxious bursts, smoke curling like restless spirits around his lined face. Harland's voice broke the silence. Archer left evidence of his fate. His letters to Miss Wynne suggest he was close to uncovering something. Something here in this lighthouse. Something dangerous enough that he had to be silenced. Thomas found it too, and he paid the price. Clara's voice trembled. You think both of them were murdered? I don't think, Harland said, repeating his words from the night before. I know. He set a small notebook on the table. It was worn, the leather cracked from salt air. I found this tucked behind the stairwell, wedged beneath a loose stone. Archer's handwriting, his final log. He writes of irregularities in the fuel records, oil missing, lamps not trimmed properly, shipments short. He suspected theft, and he suspected someone here was responsible. Mr. Alcott's face paled. Theft? From this place? No one would dare. Margaret's voice cut in like a blade. Wouldn't they? Oil is money, husband. A barrel of it can fetch enough to feed a family for months. Are you so certain every man you've trained was loyal? Her words struck like a dart. Harland noted the way Mr. Alcott's pipe shook in his hands. The old keeper lowered his eyes. There were shortages, yes. I thought it was mistakes in shipment. I never reported them. I didn't want the board to send inspectors to think me incompetent. You concealed it, Harland said grimly, and in doing so, you left Archer vulnerable when he discovered the truth. But I didn't kill him, Alcott burst out, his voice trembling with desperation. God help me, Inspector, I would never kill a boy under my care. Archer was like a son to me. Harland let the silence stretch, then turned to Margaret. And you, madam, you speak quickly, you defend fiercely, but you avoid one truth. You despised Archer, didn't you? Margaret's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then her words poured out like venom. Yes, I despised him. He was a dreamer. He filled Clara's head with talk of cities and escape, while this tower demanded work, discipline, obedience. He thought himself better than us, better than my husband who gave his life to this place. I feared he would bring ruin here, Inspector. Ruin. Clara's eyes widened in shock. So you admit it? You hated him enough to— Margaret slammed her hand on the table. Do not twist my words, girl. Hate is not the same as murder. But Harland saw it. The flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a flash of guilt. Or was it fear? He looked at Clara next. You knew Archer better than anyone. Did he ever confide what he found? Did he share details of who he suspected? Clara hesitated, clutching the letters. Only that He believed someone was lying, that the records didn't match, but he never said who. He promised to tell me once he had proof. That night, the night he vanished, he never came. The room was thick with tension, suspicion weaving between them like invisible threads. Every word revealed motives: love, loyalty, greed, resentment, but none yet revealed the killer's hand. Harland stood, his figure looming over them. 3 remain, but one of you carries the weight of 2 deaths, and before this storm breaks, I will drag your secret into the light. Outside, thunder rolled like a drum of judgment. Inside, the Lighthouse Keepers' secrets coiled tighter, ready to strangle whoever dared expose them. Morning came not with calm, but with a brutal clarity. The storm began to break, rays of pale sunlight piercing through ragged clouds. The lighthouse, battered yet unbowed, still stood like a sentinel on the cliffs, and within its walls, Inspector Harland prepared to lay bare the truth. He gathered them in the lantern chamber at the top of the tower. The beacon burned weakly, its lens fractured by sabotage. The sea stretched endless below, a reminder that isolation left no room for escape. Harland's voice carried like a verdict. 2 men are gone. Archer, silenced for discovering a theft. Greaves, killed because he stumbled upon the same truth. I told you before, the killer is among us. Now, I will name them. Clara's breath caught, her knuckles white as she gripped Archer's letters. Mr. Alcott's pipe hung limp in his mouth, unlit, his eyes sunken with sleepless guilt. Margaret stood rigid, her dark dress whipping in the draft, her expression unreadable. Harland turned first to Alcott. You concealed the shortages. You were afraid of being deemed unfit, afraid of losing your post, but you did not kill Archer. Your weakness was silence, not murder. Alcott sagged as though struck, shame etched deep, but also relief. Then Harland's gaze shifted to Clara. You loved Archer, and for that, you concealed your connection until you could hide it no longer. Love is a motive, yes, but your grief is genuine. You did not strike down the man you hoped to marry. Clara's tears spilled freely, her body trembling. Finally, his eyes locked on Margaret. He spoke slowly, deliberately. You despised Archer, not only for his dreams, but for what he knew. You feared he would expose the theft, expose the shortages you helped conceal. Because it was you, Margaret, who siphoned the oil, who sold it quietly through the village traders. You thought no one would notice until Archer did. Her face remained stone, but her hands betrayed her, gripping the railing until her knuckles whitened. You confronted him, Harland pressed on, his voice rising over the howl of the wind. And when he refused to stay silent, you pushed him. Not into the sea, not yet. You struck him down in the storage cellar. You hid his body in the cistern below, where the storm's roar would mask the sound. And when Greaves discovered his logbook and pieced together your crime, you arranged his fall on the stairs. Clara gasped. Alcott muttered a hoarse denial, shaking his head in disbelief. Margaret's lips curled into a bitter smile. You speak as though you were there, Inspector. I wasn't, Harland said evenly. But Archer was. His final entry names you. Hidden behind the stone it was waiting for me to find. He laid the notebook open on the iron table. The final page was scrawled, but legible. If I do not survive this night, it will be by Margaret's hand. She has stolen from the light, and now she would snuff mine out. Silence fell, heavy as the sea itself. Margaret's mask cracked. A tremor ran through her body, her eyes flashing with defiance and desperation. "Do you think they will hang me for saving my husband's post? For trying to keep this place alive when the board starved us of supplies? Archer was a dreamer. His kind cannot survive the sea. I did what I had to." "You did what you chose," Harlan replied coldly. In a sudden frenzy, Margaret lunged toward the lens, her intent to shatter it fully, to plunge the chamber into chaos. But Harland was quicker. He seized her wrist, twisting it until the vial she held dropped and shattered, its stolen oil spilling across the floor. Mr. Alcott groaned, as though struck in the chest. "Margaret, how could you?" Her eyes blazed. "I did it for you, for us. You were too weak to keep this tower, too bound to rules. I bore the burden, and they—" She spat the word. "They threatened it all." The storm outside gave one last furious roar before subsiding. The chamber filled with sunlight, golden and unforgiving. Margaret collapsed to her knees, her shoulders shaking, not with sorrow, but with fury at being caught. Clara clung to the letters, whispering Archer's name through tears. Alcott stared at his wife, broken, his entire life's work crumbling before him. Inspector Harland stood tall, his voice steady. "The sea claims many lives, but this was murder, and justice will not be drowned by waves." And so the keeper's secret was no longer hidden. The lighthouse, scarred by storm and shadow, would shine again, but the stain of betrayal would linger in its walls forever.